Practice 9-2 quadratic functions. So when we have a quadratic function in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, we can't just look at this last constant and say, oh, this is where the y-intercept is, because we have this bx right here. So if we want to know where the vertex is, we first need to find the axis of symmetry. Usually, if there's no middle term, the axis of symmetry is the y-axis. But since we have this middle term, it shifts either to the right or to the left. So what we do is we plug our coefficients, b and a, into the equation opposite b over 2a. So for number 1, we have x squared minus 10x plus 2, where a is 1, because there's an invisible 1 here, b is negative 10, and c is 2. Okay, so we're going to plug this in. So opposite of b is the opposite of negative 10, and the opposite of negative 10 is positive 10 over 2 times 1. So 2 times 1 is 2, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So our axis of symmetry is x equals 5. So that means if we have a graph, our axis of symmetry, our parabola, goes through here. So it's going to be somewhere on this line, the vertex. Okay, so what we do in order to find out how high up or down this line the parabola starts, or the vertex is we plug in 5 for x and see what y equals. So instead of 1x squared minus 10x plus 2, we're going to say y equals 5 squared minus 10 times 5 plus 2. So 5 squared is 25. 10 times 5 is 50 plus 2. So 25 minus 50 is negative 25. And negative 25 plus 2 is negative 23. So our vertex is 5, negative 23. Okay? So that's the first two parts. It also wants us to find the domain and range. So the domain is all possible values for x. And as you can see with a parabola like this, even though we can't see it, it keeps going and going and going. And even though it might take forever for it to extend all the way in either direction, it will eventually get there. So the domain is x equals all real numbers. Okay? So since y is negative 23, when we look at our range is all possible values for y. So it's never going to go below negative 23 because this is where it starts. It's not, the lines aren't going to go down. So when we say range, we're going to say y is greater than or equal to negative 23. And these are your 3 answers for number 1. Okay, for number 4, we have 3x squared plus 18x plus 9. So what we're going to do is we are going to label a, b, and c, and we're going to plug it into the equation opposite b over 2a. So opposite b is positive 18, so opposite of that is negative 18 over 2 times a is 3, so 2 times 3. And 2 times 3 is 6, and negative 18 divided by 6 is negative 3. So our axis of symmetry is at x equals negative 3. Now in order to find our vertex, we're going to plug this in for x. So we have 3 times negative 3 squared plus 18 times negative 3 plus 9. So negative 3 squared is positive 9, which is 27. Okay, 18 times 3, or 18 times negative 3, anytime you have one positive and one negative, it's going to be a negative number. So it's going to be negative 54 and then we're going to add 9. So what we have is negative 18. So this is our y value. So our vertex is negative 3, negative 18. So you're going to write this down for number 4. Our domain is all real numbers. Whoops. Can't write. All real numbers. And our range is y is greater than or equal to negative 18. Okay, so this is number 4. So for number 7, it wants us to match each graph with its function. So over here we see that this is a positive parabola. It's going up, so we can cross out A because it has a negative right here. Okay, and now we want to figure out what the axis of symmetry is. So for B, A is 1, and B is negative 3. So we're going to plug it into opposite B over 2A. So that is positive 3 over 2 times 1, and that is 3 halves. So if we look at this, because this is positive, it is possible that this is our function, because if we look at 1.5, which is the same as 3 halves, that's where our axis of symmetry is. So our answer is going to be B. So for number 10, we want to graph each function, and the first thing we want to do is find our axis of symmetry and the vertex, because that will tell us the possible values of x that we need to find. So let's see. We have opposite B, so this is B, 1 is A, C is 4. So opposite of negative 6 is positive 6 over 2 times 1, because A is 1, so that's 3, because 6 divided by 2 is 3. X equals 3. So now we want to find our vertex, so we are going to find our y value by plugging 3 in for all of our x's. So we have 3 squared minus 6 times 3 plus 4. So that's 9 minus 18 plus 4, and that equals negative 5. So our vertex is 3, negative 5. So let's look at our coordinate thing, and we have 1, 2, 3, and then going down 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's our vertex. Okay, and this is our axis of symmetry. We know that this line cuts that in half. So now we want to create a table to find some other values. So we know that the range is never going to go below negative 5. So we're just going to choose 2 other values for x, and let's choose small numbers like 0 and 1. Okay, so x, y, 0, 1. And of course y is the same as x squared minus 6x plus 4. Oops, 1 goes here, not there. So if we plug in 0, we have 0 squared minus 6 times 0 plus 4, and that equals 4. If we plug in 1, we have 1 squared minus 6 times 1 plus 4, and that equals 1 minus 6 plus 4, and that is negative 1. So we have 0, 4, and 1, negative 1. So over here we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, negative 1. Okay, so this is our first side, and since the other side on the axis of symmetry is going to be exactly the same, we're just going to draw the same thing, because that's the definition of axis of symmetry. It cuts it exactly in half. Both sides are going to look the same. So this is number 10. So for number 13, first things first is to find our axis of symmetry. So this is A, this is B, this is C. Opposite of negative 8 is positive 8. So we have positive 8 over 2 times A, which is negative 2. So we have 8 divided by negative 4, and that equals negative 2. So our axis of symmetry is x equals negative 2. So if we look at our graph, we're going to go to negative 2, and we're going to know that our vertex is going to lie somewhere on this line. We just don't know how far up or how far down. So we're going to go back here, and we're going to plug in negative 2 for all of our x's. So we're going to say negative 2 times negative 2 squared minus 8 times negative 2, okay, and plus 5. So negative 2 squared is positive 4, and positive 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Okay, negative 8 times negative 2 is positive 16, and plus 5. So when we add this all up, we have positive 13. So our vertex is negative 2, positive 13. So let's go here, and our vertex is going to be up at 13. Let's go by 2's. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So 13 is going to be about over here. Okay, so now let's choose two other values. We can do, how about 0 and negative 1? X 0 and negative 1. And we're going to do our equation, which is negative 2x squared minus 8x plus 5. Okay, so when we plug in 0 for x, okay, we have negative 2 times 0 squared minus 8 times 0, and anything times 0 is going to be 0. So we essentially have 0 minus 0 plus 5, and that's going to be 5. Now let's plug in negative 1, so we have negative 2 times negative 1 squared minus 8 times negative 1 plus 5. So negative 1 squared is positive 1, and positive 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. Negative 8 plus negative 1 is positive 8 plus 5, and that is going to equal 11. So our two other points are going to be 0, 5, and negative 1, 11. Okay, so we can plot that out. So our first one is 0, 5, and that's going to be right here. And then we have negative 1, 11, which is right about here. So this is actually a parabola that's going downwards. So it's going to look like this. It doesn't matter if it's perfect or not, as long as it's like the same approximate shape. Okay, so number 16, it wants us to graph each inequality. So x squared plus 1 is going to be a pretty simple one to graph because there's no middle term. There's no b, so the axis of symmetry is going to be 0. Okay, and since this is a plus 1, we know that the vertex is going to be at 1. So it's going to look like, let's see, 5, this. And since it wants us, and since it's an inequality, y is greater than this graph, we're going to look at our vertex, which is here, and we're going to shade in everything above this on the y-axis, but within the lines. So we're shading inside the u. So that's number 16. And that is it for practice 9-2.